I went out to be arrested. And as a result of my daughter's advice, I have 5.5 hours of recording of the police bringing guns into my home, laughing that, oh, looks like being a good Samaritan's going to get her a gun charge.
Syd Fizzard for Rebel News, and today we're bringing you an update to the story of the Coutts Alberta blockade that alleges RCMP impropriety with regards to seized weapons, weapons charges, and conspiracy charges laid against people in the Alberta border town of Coutts last February. At a recent event to commemorate the 1 year of the anti-COVID mandate blockade, Coutts local Joanne Person took to the microphone to share her story. Joanne was arrested in the early hours of February 14th, 2022, after the execution of search warrants by RCMP.
So a search warrant was conducted last night it was approximately midnight, 12:30, where 3 trailers associated to a group that had arrived separate to the original protesters, but ended up being a part of this whole situation. And this group, we conducted a search warrant into 3 trailers associated to them, resulting in the seizure of weapons, firearms, ammunition.
Joanne was charged with possession of a weapon for dangerous purpose and mischief over $5,000. On January 16th this year, her weapon and mischief charges were dropped at request of the prosecutor. And on January 28th this year, she announced she may have evidence suggesting the RCMP planted weapons in her home. Rebel News is not suggesting that the RCMP planted evidence at the home of Joanne Person. We haven't seen or heard Joanne's evidence at this point of this recording. We're reporting what she says as newsworthy, and we will continue to stay on the story as it develops. And we will do our best to independently confirm any allegations made in today's video. But nonetheless, what Joanne is saying is another part of the story of the Coutts Blockade that you should hear. With that, you have the basics of this story, and soon we will have a more in-depth report analyzing the situation in full. But for the time being, here is Joanne now telling her story as a Coutts local of the blockade which lifted COVID restrictions in Alberta and catalyzed the former Premier's resignation from politics.
Happy anniversary! I'm so proud of every one of you for speaking your truth and standing up for freedom. Our God-given rights. Let's never forget that. And there's no authority greater. On January 27th last year, I found out from 2 older residents who lived in my little border town that there was a convoy of trucks coming to Coutts. My first question to them was, should we make lunches? And we did. We built 84 of them, and people just kept dropping off hundreds more to my vehicle. And I was out there all day loving every one of you. I baked 27 dozen cookies, and the 3 of us made 84 lunches to give to the truckers, and the cafe made hundreds more. I loaded up my car with a sign saying, "We love you truckers, free food and water here." So did many people. It was amazing. It was one of the best days of my life. I spent a lot of time crying that day, tears of joy, for the hope that filled my heart, because I think for all of us, we were losing hope. I realized I wasn't alone, and the desperation I had been feeling was shared with thousands of people who felt the same way. I've been teaching for nearly 30 years, and I saw students whose lives were being destroyed and plagued with uncertainty and despair. Teenagers and even some younger were committing suicide. A member of my ex-husband's family was one of those children. I was heartbroken. I felt helplessly bound, like we all did, by the restrictions that were put on us. All of us, but my heart ached for the young men and women who saw no other way out, and it's still an epidemic today. Nobody knew that our tiny village would double or more in population when the truckers came, including many of the men, women, and children that traveled in the convoy. But most of the people who live in Coutts were overjoyed with their presence. Our mayor, not so much, but the rest of the town, yes. The weather turned bitter not long after the arrival of such wonderful people. Some people were stranded in their trucks due to the weather and the distance that they were parked from the saloon, where the truckers and protesters gathered for meals and prayer and discussions about the madness and the mandates. I've always taken care of those who are in need, and the convoy was no exception for me. There was a need to bring hot food and drink out to people who could not get to the saloon for whatever reason, to get their necessities. I started driving through the parked vehicles, honking my horn and offering hot food and drinks. I loved my self-appointed job and came to love many of the people there that I met. Some called me the coffee lady. By the end of the weekend, I had a father ask me if his son and his friends could move their trailer onto my lot and get them off the highway. I have a big yard full of gravel, so I said yes. A trailer with 5 young men became my immediate neighbors. A day or so later, Chris Carbert asked me if he could move his trailer onto my yard. Again, I said yes. I saw my yard as a safe place off the highway for people to have their trailers, and why not? I had the room. From that moment on, I left my door unlocked so they could come and go for use of the bathroom or a hot cup of tea that was always available. By day 4, I met a family who had a little girl who was down with a bad cold. I talked to her mom and said that I would be more than happy to take care of her and help her get better. I became friends with her mom and her family, and we remain friends to this day. Right, Corey? Of course, the shower was available to all who stayed at my property, but it wasn't long until Corey asked me if she could give my number to a few people because the saloon was getting, in her words, a little bit ripe. Of course, I said yes, and from then on, I added the task of making sure towels got washed twice a day. And I also became a laundry service with the exclusion of folding. That was my deal. I'll wash them, I'll dry them, but you fold them. For many people that came thinking it was a weekend thing, never packed a second pair of underwear. So I loved my job. I loved it every minute. We had community building. Of course, the shower was available to all who stayed on my property, and many, many others. I met Walter, wherever he is. I see him standing over there. One morning as he pulled up and loaded me up with donuts and muffins and coffee to take around to folks down the line. Thank you, Walter. I still thank you, and I'm sure they do too. It was exhilarating to be a part of history in the making and to stand up against the oppression we were all under. The police presence in town was growing daily, and there was constant tension as police tried repeatedly to incite reaction from the peaceful protesters that were standing up for the rights of all of us. I'm so proud of the true Canadian spirit that grew out of love for each other. No one bought into the games being played by the RCMP. Everyone kept the peace and stood strong against the tyranny that we had been living through. Twice I stood on the road and stopped a convoy of police cars that were speeding through town, ignoring stop signs. I feared they would end up running over the little ones who were playing in the streets or walking around our community. I brought this up at our town council meeting because the police were not obeying their own rules. It seems to me that to uphold the law, you must abide by the same laws of your authority, or your authority becomes moot. The night of the raid on my house was a terrifying experience. I got out of bed for about the 4th time to be sure. I had the last load of towels ready to go for morning, and the coffee set up, and I saw blue and red lights flashing everywhere, all around my house. I freaked out, to tell you the truth. My cell phone rang, and it happened to be a police officer on my cell phone. I didn't know what was going on, but I was frightened and worried for my safety. The first person I called was my daughter and told her what was happening. I called her on my landline with the police on my cell phone. My daughter Suzanne spoke with the officer who lied to her and told her I was not being arrested, but that they were there to search my house. I told them I would go out to my car and sit where it was warm and they could have full run of the house. They told me they'd have to detain me. My daughter was furious and accused him of lying to me, which he had. But my daughter's a very smart woman. In fact, that's her last name. She's told me, Mom, don't hang up the phone. Just set it down on the counter. Just set it down and leave the line open. And I went out to be arrested. And as a result of my daughter's advice, I have 5.5 hours of recording of the police bringing guns into my home, laughing that, oh, looks like being a good Samaritan's gonna get her a gun charge. One guy warmed his pizza up in my microwave. I was brutally manhandled that night. I have a torn ligament in my shoulder, bruised arm, damaged wrist, broken teeth, and a hernia rupture. I was put in a freezing cold cell that was filthy with pathogens from blood, spit, and feces. I was denied my medication for my heart and blood pressure. I was threatened that I better not buzz for help again or I would be in trouble. EMS was eventually called to take my blood pressure, but nobody told me the results. My heart was racing and I was in a cold sweat. I actually feared for my life and prayed. I prayed I would see my son and daughter again. My car was damaged that night. On the audio recording, my alarm went off and there's a big dent in the passenger side of my car. My guess is they threw somebody else against it. My home was damaged and ransacked. It was disgusting behavior by the very people who were sworn to protect us. I was told they could vaccinate me when I reached jail because I hadn't been vaccinated. I just politely said, no thank you. And while in the glass cubicle I was in, they made me wear a mask, even though there was no way of contact with others. I was strip searched in an effort to humiliate me right before my release. And all I could think of was, wouldn't their mothers be proud? And began a long journey of defending myself with the incredible help of Stand For Thee founders, Jane Scarf and Rebecca Shepherd. My charges have been dropped, and the words dangerous and weapon will not follow me through my life. So thank you, Jane and Rebecca. I think it's time to release the recordings to the lawyers who are defending these men. And let the law stand and not bow to the legal system. This is in the works now. I will be doing a press conference in the near future, and it will be open to all media, both the government-controlled and the independent press. Mainstream government-owned media, CBC in particular, cost me my career of almost 30 years by reporting false information about the events of that night and slandering me. The mayor of Coutts referred to me as a domestic terrorist, which resulted in harassment from several people. RCMP drove back and forth past my home the night I was released from jail with a spotlight. It was like being in a gulag. Every 10 minutes, my friend, Shell, filmed them. This is not something that should happen in our country. I've heard many people say that to look at the Canadian flag, they feel shame. Well, folks, I feel proud. We all should feel proud. The truckers and the convoy of 2022 made me prouder than ever to call this country home. You people and what you did and what we are all still doing has sparked a fire around the world. Every person knows the Canadian flag. You lit a fire, and today we stand together to continue fighting for all of our tomorrows. All of these little people that are our tomorrows. They'll carry the love of this country and their fellow men and women forward in a world of freedom that we all desire. Delightfully loved ones, if he loved us with such tremendous love, then loving one another should be our way of life. John 4:11. Thank you all for walking in the light of truth. This country and all the men and women in it are worth the effort. God bless you all, and hold the line as we move forward in love for one another. Thank you.
To check out our latest project on the Public Order Emergency Commission, go to TrudeauOnTrial.com.